Coming up on Theater Talk.
It was like this outburst of anti-gay feeling that lasted like 2 or 3 years. My theory is it was sparked by the success of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which is a great play.
Absolutely.
Got great reviews when it opened, and then like a year later, it was like word got out that Edward Albee was gay.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm producer Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
So, Michael, I've been reading this wonderful book, Eminent Outlaws, and you have too.
This is a terrific book, Eminent Outlaws, The Gay Writers Who Changed America, by one of my favorite authors, Christopher Bram, who joins us tonight on Theater Talk, making his debut appearance here on a theater show. Welcome.
Oh, great to be here, Michael, Susan.
Christopher also wrote the celebrated novel Gods and Monsters, and one of my favorite novels, also The Lives of the Circus Animals, which is about a theater critic who gets shot.
He gets shot by a playwright's mother.
That's right.
Everybody's favorite fantasy.
Absolutely. Well, this is a wonderful book. Here's Christopher's new book, Eminent Outlaws, and we have him on Theater Talk because a number of these gay writers were playwrights, very important in the American theater. All right. You begin with someone who's got a play on Broadway right now, Gore Vidal. He's got the revival of The Best Man, a terrific revival on Broadway now. And Gore Vidal is really the seminal figure in gay literature after World War II. What is going on in Gore Vidal's life that makes him so important at this time?
No, he was there he was present at the creation. It's really interesting how he was there at the beginning in 1948, published it was his second novel, City in the Pillar. It's one of the first openly gay novels. Mm-hmm. Came out in January 1948, 2 weeks after the Kinsey Report was published.
Yes.
And 1 week before Truman Capote published his first novel, Other Voices, Other Rooms. So the subject was clearly in the air. Mm-hmm. And it's City in the Pillar, it's an amazing novel. It's kind of pulpy. It has this, but it's very direct, and it does not pull its punches. The reviewers didn't pull their punches either. It got slaughtered. It got really hit hard, so hard that Vidal backed away from the subject for the next few years. He did not want to write about homosexuality for a while. He then discovered that it was more profitable not to write novels, but to write for TV, which then led to his career as a playwright.
That's right.
I mean, his first plays were actually adapted from his television work.
I want to ask you this initial critical response to one of the first openly gay novels. You've read those criticisms. Were those criticisms motivated by shock at the frankness of a book about homosexuality? Were they motivated by homophobia, or were they legitimate criticisms of some failings of one of Gore Vidal's early novels?
No, they were motivated by hatred. I mean, by just disgust. This is an alarming new subject, and they just didn't know how to respond to it. They were really, and the book is a little raw. I think that didn't help. It was interesting how Capote's book is more eloquent, more poetic. And they were a little more comfortable with it, although Capote came in for his blows too.
Right.
But Vidal's was very raw and direct, and it got clobbered for that. But I mean, one of the things I found researching this book, reading all these reviews from the 40s, 50s, well into the 60s, just the amount of strong anti-gay feeling on the part of reviewers. It was relentless. I mean, I kind of knew about it abstractly, but to actually sit and read review after review that was just full of hate and anger and contempt, real scorn, was quite shocking.
Well, you point out, I think it's a famous essay by Stanley Kaufman about homosexuality in the theater. And the point Stanley was making in that is he not saying that, playwrights basically should come out of the closet, that they're disguising their homosexuality by the kind of plays they would write, and it would be better if they could just openly write about being gay?
Yeah, it's a strange, interesting essay. It's called Homosexual Drama and Its Disguises.
Right.
And people read it in two different ways. There is the way you just described, where he's saying, why are these homosexual playwrights Why don't they write about being gay? Instead, they're pretending they're straight, and they're writing about straight people, and they're telling lies about us.
Like Blanche Dubois.
Like Blanche Dubois.
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? These were all seen as, these aren't plays about our lives, these are plays about gay men dressed up in drag. And Kaufman was saying, if they were writing about gay people, I'd be fine with that. Interestingly enough, in the later years, I've not come across any positive review he ever gave of a gay play. I mean, later on with movies, he finally gave Brokeback Mountain a good review. But
what's the other way that I read the essay one way, but you said there's another way you read it too. That
he's very critical of these gay men, what they're saying about straight people, and he says they're lies. He said, we treat gay people badly, so of course they hate us. So of course they tell us these mean, ugly things about us. They present us with Blanche Dubois is this one big drag queen. Martha in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, she's another mean, hateful drag queen. William Inge, who was gay, but who wrote rather straightforward melodramas, he comes in for some clobbering too. Strangest thing about Kaufman's piece is he doesn't name names. It would have been, at the time in 1965, 1966, it would have been actionable. He could have been, it would have been libelous.
Right, if he had basically said Edward Albee is a homosexual.
He would have been taken to court. And so he just says, our three most important playwrights are all alleged homosexuals.
Fascinating.
And so it becomes this poison pen letter in a way. More interesting still, he was not alone in this. He was part of, this had been going on for a couple of years. Howard Taubman, Philip Roth.
Oh, there's one from Time magazine from '66. Homosexuals are failed artists, and their special creative gift are a myth.
Yes.
Yes,
yeah.
that you both, yeah.
There was like this outburst of anti-gay feeling that lasted like 2 or 3 years. My theory is it was sparked by the success of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which is a great play.
Absolutely.
Got great reviews when it opened. And then like a year later, it was like word got out that Edward Albee was gay. I mean, Edward Albee was never in the closet. He was always straightforward.
He was always openly.
Always openly open about his sexuality. Yeah. But word of that got out, and these critics became uncomfortable. They said, oh, this isn't really about us after all. And one by one, you see these attacks and these kind of this backing away from it. Until the last piece, I think, is Stanley Kaufman's is the most famous, but it had been, he was following a long tradition of drama critics making these criticisms.
Interesting. And if I'm not mistaken, Virginia Woolf did not win the Pulitzer Prize that year. It should have been the play. Do you think there was some homophobia there surrounding that decision?
I don't know about if it was the homophobia as much as the language.
Yeah.
It was the committee, the playwrights committee awarded it to the play. Yeah. But then the people at the top said, no, we don't like this play. It's ugly and mean and nasty, and we're not going to give an award at all this year.
One of the things that I really like about this book is you give us a sense of what the New York City literary world was like. I mean, all of these people, Allen Ginsberg and Truman Capote and Gore Vidal, they were all, and Tennessee Williams, they all knew each other. They were friendships then that curdled and rivalries set into place. Can you tell us a little bit about that world when the rivalry sets in among some of these guys, particularly Capote and Vidal?
No, Capote and Vidal met in 1947 in Anais Nin's living room at a party at Anais Nin's house.
Yeah, why not?
And they liked each other. They were in their early 20s, both of them, 21 and 22. Capote's actually older than Vidal, which we forget. But they were very friendly. They went to the baths together. I love that image of Truman Capote and Gore Vidal at the baths, standing there in towels. There wanted to talk. Yeah. Vidal wanted to go have sex.
Right.
So it didn't work out. But then Capote began to get more attention. And there was a big piece in Life magazine on the new upcoming writers. And Capote got a whole page. And Vidal,
cover, right?
And he hadn't even published yet.
Yeah, yeah.
It was just, he was the new upcoming, published some short stories. And Vidal's picture was this little postage stamp in the corner. And that's when things began to fall off. And Capote tried to be friendly with Vidal, but Vidal just, the anger built and the hatred and the competitiveness built over the years. And Vidal became obsessed. I mean, one friend described how he took a cross-country trip with Vidal, and they would stop at every public library in the way, and Vidal would look in and see whose books had been checked out more often, his or Capote's.
Unbelievable.
You have a wonderful quote from Tennessee Williams about Vidal, where Williams said, "I liked him, but only through the strenuous effort to overlook his conceit."
Yes.
Allen Ginsberg, very, very important in your book. The Howl, really changed things. Can you give us the background of what was going on in Ginsberg's life when he came up with this poem?
Well, interesting, Ginsberg, he was originally from New Jersey, went to school at Columbia, spent time at Kerouac and William Burroughs, hung out with them, ended up being arrested with some other friends with a stolen car, and he ended up pleading insanity and going to a mental hospital for 6 months.
Yeah.
And part of the evidence of his insanity was that he'd been having sex with men. That was in his journals, and it was presented in court. And rather than sending him to prison, he was sent to a mental hospital. So when he got out of the hospital, he said, okay, I'm going to go straight, literally, now. I'm going to behave. I'm going to be a good person now. No more drugs, no more sex with men. And he ended up out in San Francisco. And he even, he was seeing a woman. He had a 9-to-5 job. He lived a surprisingly straight-laced life. He still remained good friends with William Burroughs and Kerouac and the others. He did what he could to get Burroughs's novel Junkie published. Mm-hmm. But he was going to be a good boy. He was going to be straight. Mm-hmm. And then he met Peter Orlovsky, a young painter, very beautiful, and he fell in love with him, and it was just confused everything. Ginsberg was seeing a $1 a session psychiatrist in Berkeley, and he was saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with my life. And the psychiatrist said, well, what do you want to do? He said, well, I want to quit my job, move in with Peter, and write poems, but I'm afraid when I get old, Peter's going to drop me and I'm going to be all alone. And the psychiatrist said, you're a really nice guy. You'll meet somebody else. and that was all it took. Ginsberg then kind of quit his job, moved in with Peter Orlovsky, and shortly after they began work on this poem, Howl, addressed to one of his friends back in the mental hospital in New York.
Because when he says, I've seen the best minds of my generation, he was referring to
Carl Solomon.
Yes.
And the poem is dedicated to Carl Solomon.
Yeah.
And it just poured out of him. I mean, often people write poems that they're pretending to be just a real raw single outburst, but for Howl it really was. And it turned out he said, I've really got something special here, and started to show it to friends, and they agreed. And then he gave a reading of it in San Francisco. One of 6 poets, and it was just, he blew everybody away. They were just, wow, this is an amazing piece of work. Yeah. Published by City Lights Books by Lawrence Ferlinghetti, a straight man who loved good poetry. And the poem came out, and it was seized for being obscene by the local police in San Francisco. And that's what made it famous. It went on trial. Ginsberg was out of the country. He was in North Africa at the time.
Right. Reading about his poem on trial.
Reading about this in the newspaper, which is amazing to think of. But Ferlinghetti was charged with publishing something obscene. I think originally one of the bookstore clerks was charged with selling obscenity, but that charge was dropped. Yeah. And this trial received national attention, and all these different newspapers across the country were covering it. I think Time magazine covered it. Yeah. The judge who taught Sunday school actually turned out to be a very good literary critic.
Yes, you quote his decision here, which is fascinating.
He loved the poem. Well, I don't know if he loved the poem. He respected. He understood what was going on here, and said, "This is not obscene. This is making a moral statement." And he found the poem not guilty of obscenity, and it was released, and went on to become, for a poem, a book of poems, a bestseller.
Well, this touches on the subtitle of your book, though, The Gay Writers Who Changed America. Mm-hmm. Can you expand on that for a little bit? Changed America? I mean, we certainly see that with The Howl when the obscenity laws are changed because of this. Other examples of that?
Well, just kind of getting the word out, at the time the book begins, 1948, homosexuality was illegal in all 48 states. And you couldn't even talk about it. People could not talk about men having sex with men, women having sex with women. It was just to talk about it was considered obscene. And or if you admitted you did it yourself, you could get arrested.
Yeah.
So writers learned to do it as stories, as fiction. And they were able to kind of, in a way, publicize it, these love stories, by telling them as fiction. And word got out, and kind of word spread. People became more aware of, there is this whole other life going on that we didn't know existed.
And moving from Williams and Capote, where there was a lifestyle that was condemned, and they were writing in a guarded way because their lifestyle was being condemned. And then you trace into Kushner, where we're going into the gay, self-realization, and what we've come to now, the gay as a civil rights issue, that it's no longer a source of bitterness and doubt for writers, but it becomes a source for self-celebration.
Yeah, for a kind of tap into this energy, this electricity.
And in your book tracks that transformation, which is one of the things that's so interesting about it. And then, as Michael says, bracketed by Vidal at the beginning. And then Vidal at the end. Vidal's not at the end yet, but what has been his attitude towards the more recent literature, since that's how you end up the book?
Well, Vidal's had a kind of curious career, because he is like the godfather of gay literature.
Yeah.
At the same time, he doesn't want to be. He hit upon, in the 60s, he hit upon this great strategic device of saying, there's no such thing as homosexuals, there's only homosexual acts. Homosexual is an adjective, it's not a noun. And he denounced the idea there's any such thing as a gay identity. And has clung to, and it was very useful and effective in the 60s when he first hit upon it. And he continues to cling to it even now, years later, when it's no longer necessary. I mean, one of the biggest uses of it was in his battle with William F. Buckley, where they were both on the Democratic National Convention as providing commentary, and they lost their tempers with each other.
To answer Mr. Buckley's spontaneous inaccuracy, we have almost a Stalinist desire to revise history.
It wasn't spontaneous, it was planned.
Your calculated desire.
Vidal called Buckley a crypto-Nazi, and Buckley said, shut your face, you goddamn queer, or I'll plaster you and you'll stay plastered.
I believe you can get it on YouTube.
You can get it on YouTube. Yeah, it's amazing. It's like
incredible.
The insult heard around the world. And it should have ended there, but Buckley wanted to write an article about it in Esquire magazine, attacking Vidal as a homosexual. Esquire magazine said, okay, sure, but Vidal has to be able to respond. So they each wrote their pieces. Lawyers looked at them. It went back and forth for months. And Buckley wanted to call Vidal homosexual. Vidal countered, there's no such thing. You can't call me that because it doesn't exist. And so finally the articles were published, and you read them. And Buckley is trying so hard to make this point, as if it's really going to prove something. And at this point, it wouldn't have. And he's like Elmer Fudd trying to get Bugs Bunny. He just can't nab him. And Vidal's piece is every blow hits, and it's devastating. And Buckley took Vidal to court over it.
That's right.
And it was in the courts for another 3 years, I think.
I want to say something, though, about a critic who is a very, very good friend of ours, John Simon, who has been accused over the years of homophobia, making homophobic statements. I mean, I know John very well, and I tell you, John is not a homophobe, although he has said some things that have been controversial. But as you point out in this book, John Simon was a very early champion of Larry Kramer's The Normal Heart.
Yeah, he loved The Normal Heart. Yeah. Although it's interesting, the circumstances in which he saw it was his friend, Ned Rorem, the composer, who's gay.
One of John's best friends.
John Simon had been overheard at a theater saying a play he hated, written by a gay man. He told somebody, don't you just wish all the homosexuals would die?
Of AIDS, I think.
Of AIDS, yeah.
And Liz Smith got that.
And it appeared in the New York newspapers, and it was kind of, and trying to kind of defend, Ned Rorem wanted to make, he knew Simon wasn't a homophobe.
Yeah.
And he wanted Simon also to understand why people were upset. So he did an interview with him in the New York Native, New York gay newspaper. But before that interview, he took Simon to see The Normal Heart. And Simon loved it. Simon ended the play in tears and went and wrote a very good review of it. But still kind of defended, what I was saying was rhetorical, you can't take me literally, I won't apologize for it.
We only have a few minutes left, but can you call our attention? We know many of these writers, Williams and Baldwin and Kushner. Can you call our attention, though, to a writer in this book who you think is deserving of being looked at again and considered more? Maybe a gay writer who's kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit, whose books we should go back to?
Well, almost everybody I write about in love has gotten some attention. Some I think need more attention or need to be taken more seriously. Armistead Maupin.
Yeah.
First-rate novelist, very popular novelist, and because he's popular, people don't always recognize the craft and intelligence that goes into his work. Kind of based in San Francisco, did this amazing serialized novel began in the San Francisco Chronicle. And it's like this community of people, gay and straight. And it's like this world of Eden. It's very utopian in its way. I mean, people are smoking pot and having sex with each other and still getting into fights and still sometimes often unhappy, and then AIDS hits.
Yeah.
But it's a very powerful, and it's now up to 8 volumes. He just published the 8th volume in the series. It's like Trollope's Barchester novels. It has that type of scale.
Yeah. So he's one that you think doesn't get the literary respect.
He doesn't get the literary respect he deserves. I mean, he really is a major, major writer.
And having gone back and read a lot of these guys, is anyone you think is maybe a little overrated, who was taken more seriously back then than they should be, whose stuff has not held up all that well?
A dangerous question. Gore Vidal is more uneven than we often think. To go back to City in the Pillar he wrote much better later. It's like a pot boiler. It's like a dime store novel, and it makes its points and it makes them clearly. But he wrote so much better later on.
Unlike, for instance, Tennessee Williams, who, as we know, wrote so brilliantly, and then it disintegrated, and you talk about that.
I'm fascinated by this notion, though, of the disintegration, because we see it in this book with Tennessee Williams and Truman Capote.
And Truman Capote especially.
I mean, I don't know if we can psychoanalyze these people, but does their homosexuality have anything to do with the disintegration in any way?
Indirectly, I think. I mean, for both, especially for Williams and for Capote, they had enormous success. Both had bad drinking problems.
Yeah, big substance abuse issues.
Yeah. Big substance drug problems. And at a certain point, neither of them had a partner who could provide ballast. And I think they were kind of just afloat. They were adrift. Others who were of that generation, who also took the same abuse from critics, also drank heavily, but still
like
knew
Edward Albee?
Like Edward Albee. Christopher Isherwood, I think Gore Vidal to some extent. Yeah. But because they had partners in their life, they had kind of a ballast, they had kind of an anchor, and it kind of kept them bound to the earth in a way Williams and Capote weren't.
Well, I mean, and I just, for me, that I look at them and see the illness of addiction had them so badly that, and in those days, they just didn't know how to get people out, to get well.
No, that's true. Yeah, now it would be addressed and people would take care of them, but not then.
I want to point out before we go that you, at the beginning, say you're not taking on gay women, that you're leaving it to other scholars to write about the great lesbian writers of this period.
Yeah, I felt I had a complicated story enough already on my hands. And originally I wanted to do the women, and my first editor said, you've had a lot already. And I have to say I was relieved, because I don't know the women as well as the men. It's going to take a really tough, smart lesbian critic to do that job.
Yeah.
Have you heard from Edward Albee? You probably know Edward.
I've run into him and I've met him. I haven't heard anything from him. He's never said. I heard from Armistead Maupin. He was delighted. He was delighted. He said, oh my God, somebody finally took me seriously.
What about Kushner?
I've not heard from Tony Kushner, and I'm actually have been friends with Tony.
I have to say, I know we're running over, that your analysis of Angels in America and Pars Draga is one of the most succinct analysis of it that I've read.
Oh, thank you.
You really, nail what it.
Well, what does he say?
Right.
What you have to have him say what it is, Susan, so people watching know what he's saying.
So yes, I'm surprised we haven't heard from Kushner because you make such a succinct analysis of Angels in America. Can you tell us why it is so accepted and is so brilliant?
It's such a rich, complicated play, and it seems to, and it's hard to kind of understand where it goes at the end. And I explore that at great length. It's hard to sum up.
And you also say it was a play that showed gay men as being morally serious.
Yes.
All right.
I remember seeing that play with a great old friend of mine, Eric Bentley, who was a
Oh, yes, yeah.
And about midway through Angels in America, Eric leaned over to me and said, "Very skillful gay propaganda." That was his review of Angels in America. All right, the book is called Eminent Outlaws, The Gay Writers Who Changed America, a terrific literary history of gay life and gay writing in the city by Christopher Bram. Thank you very much for being a charming and insightful guest tonight.
Well, great to be here. Thank you for the great questions.
Pleasure.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Alan S. Gordon Foundation, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.